welcome. Welcome to our first webinar. I'm Katie Merrill. I'm the Director of Admissions. I know it's an interesting time for all of you and you have big decisions to make, and we're here to help you. So what we want to do is bring VLS to you virtually, and we're going to do that through videos, chats, and our webinars. Now, this is my first webinar. Again, I mentioned that earlier, so bear with me if there's any technical difficulties, but I have a great crew. So I have Simon Wilbanks, who's been chatting with you. So ask him any questions and he can help you in that regard. And I also have Melody DeFlorio. She's our Director of Financial Aid, who you, in fact, if you join us next week, we'll meet her in person. She is one of the most important people on our campus and for our students. But she's also available to answer questions, and she'll ask questions if need be. So with that said, I'd like to welcome our our Vice Dean of Students, and it's Beth McCormick. I'm gonna move my slides here, everyone. Let me just move forward. All right. So the webinar is our academic programs, and we're gonna do a series of webinars. And next week, we're going to do student services, and then the week following, we'll do student life. That way you will have a full rounded idea of who we are. All right, Dean McCormick. So I'm going to hand it over to you. And Dean McCormick, above everything that she does, avid biker, skier, all around great person to talk to, and has been doing a wonderful job putting our students at ease. So Dean McCormick, we'll have at it.
Welcome, prospective students. I'm Beth McCormick. I'm the Vice Dean for Students here, and I'm also a professor of law. I teach civil procedure, which is a required first-year JD course. So if you come and join us in the JD program, about half of you will have me for civil procedure in the fall. And I also teach many legal writing courses. Right now, this semester, I'm teaching advanced appellate advocacy. Just to tell you just a tiny bit about myself, and then I want to make 4 points about our academic program, and then I'm available for questions later if you have them. But I am coming from a practice background. So I was a practicing litigator in Boston for about 10 years before I joined the faculty of Vermont Law School about 10 years ago. So like many of you, I had some reservations about moving to South Royalton and living in such a small town after being such a city dweller for my whole life. And that really highlights the first point that I wanted to make about VLS's academic program, which is that we're flexible. So we have a number of programs that we can cater towards your specific needs. We have an extended JD program. So normally the JD program you completed in 6 semesters over 3 years. As part of our extended JD program, students take their 6 semesters over 4 calendar years. So they just take fewer credits each semester and spread it out a little bit longer. We also have an accelerated JD program. So our accelerated JD program, our students complete 6 semesters in 2 calendar years. So instead of going fall, spring, fall, spring, fall, spring, students go either summer, fall, spring, or fall, spring, summer, fall, spring, summer. We have both a summer start and a fall start AJD or accelerated JD program. We also have a reduced residency program. And as part of our reduced residency program, students are typically only on campus for 3 of their 6 semesters as a JD. And then they complete their remaining 3 semesters through a combination of online semesters in practice or externship programs. So you're here for essentially 3 semesters, and then you're wherever else you want to be for the other 3 semesters. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The second point I wanted to make about our academic program is that we're a home for people, even if they're not environmental lawyers or policy. They're not interested in environmental law and policy. We're so proud of our environmental program, and you'll hear more about that from Dean Rushlow in a little bit. But not everyone here is an environmental lawyer. I am not an environmental lawyer, and my background is not in environmental law. But there's a home for you here, even if that's not your interest. Sometimes students come here interested in environmental law and then they choose another path because they get interested in something else. Or sometimes students come here not interested in environmental law and then become interested in environmental law. So you can find a home here even if you are not right now interested in environmental law. You'll hear from Professor Clark about our Center for Justice Reform in a moment. We have been in the past ranked as one of the top schools for prosecutors and defenders. And we also just have a great general practice program where we educate students to be general practice lawyers. And of course, you'll hear more from both Professor Clark and from Dean Rushlow about our many master's programs that we have available for both environmental and in the Center for Justice Reform. The third thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is how at Vermont Law School, we really believe in learning by doing. And so we have a really robust clinical and experiential program here at the law school, and also for our master's students. For example, we have an energy clinic. We have our environmental advocacy clinic. We have our food and ag clinic. We have our environmental advocacy clinic, our legislative clinic, our South Royalton legal clinic, which specializes in landlord and tenant law, veterans' rights law, and family law issues. We also have an entrepreneurship and legal lab. We have an environmental justice clinic. I'm not sure if I mentioned that one already. So we have lots of opportunities for students to take what they learn in the classroom and then apply it in a hands-on situation through any one of our on-campus clinics. The difference between a clinic and an externship is that at a clinic, you're supervised on campus by professors at Vermont Law School. But we also have a robust externship or semester in practice program. In that program, you go off-site wherever you want. We have students in Hawaii this semester. We have students in Washington, D.C. We have students in pretty much every state that you can imagine, working either in a nonprofit or a law firm or a government agency, putting what they've learned in the classroom into practical application. If you're in part of that program, and you can do that either full or part-time, if you're part of that program, you're supervised by an on-site supervisor as well as one of our VLS professors that supervise you from here. And there's weekly check-ins and you earn academic credit for those clinical experiences. So through clinics and externships and semester and practices, we really make sure that our students are taking what they're learning in the classroom and putting it to work right away. We know that also helps students in the job market to have that practical experience on their resumes before they graduate. Aside from our clinics and our semester in practice or externship program, we also have a number of field study courses to get students out of South Royalton and to get students to apply what they've learned in a more practical setting. You may hear more about these from Dean Rushlow, but we have field studies in Montana, in Utah, and Southeast Asia. And then every year we send students to the climate conference on parties. The final thing I wanted to talk to you about today was Vermont Law School's emphasis on writing, and that's both for our JD students and our master's students. When I was a practicing lawyer in Boston, I believed that writing was the most important course that I had taken in law school. No matter what type of lawyer you want to be, whether it be a litigator or a policy lawyer, or what type of professional you want to be when you graduate from our master's programs, you're going to need to be able to communicate your ideas clearly in writing. We really believe that here at Vermont Law School, and it's part of our curriculum. So for our JD students, we're one of the few law schools that requires 3 semesters of legal writing, 3 required semesters, and of course there's electives you can take as well beyond those 3 semesters. JD students will take legal writing 1 when they first start in their first semester, then they'll take legal writing 2. And then in either the summer or the fall of their second year, they'll take a class called Appellate Advocacy, which is quite unique. In that course, we take a pending Supreme Court case, United States Supreme Court case. Half the students represent one side, half the students represent the other. They prepare briefs. They work with their professor on their briefs, and then they perform an oral argument against other students in the class. One of the really unique features of that class is that you're working on issues that are in the news, Supreme Court cases that are currently being heard. And then we often have the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. to watch the real oral argument in the case, which is really as exciting as it gets, to watch the oral argument on a case where you're actually practicing and preparing for your own oral argument in the case. So it's a class that I teach, and it's one that I'm really proud of, and it's one that really is a capstone experience for students here You always hear about the law school's a buzz when it's appellate advocacy season and right before the oral arguments. So those are 4 highlights of the curriculum here at Vermont Law School, and I will be part of today's webinar and also available for questions either later today or later. You can always feel free to email me, or we could set up a phone appointment if you want to discuss VLS's curriculum in more detail.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Thank you, Beth. I do have one question. I do have a student that's very interested in the reduced residency program. Can you kind of go over that a little more in detail about how long they're on campus and when they start their reduced residency?
Sure. So a typical student in the reduced residency program would be on campus for their first 3 semesters. So it would depend on whether there's an accelerated JD student or a regular JD student. So often that might be summer, fall, spring. They're here on campus. And then for the remaining 3 semesters, which would be summer, fall, spring of their second year, they're taking a combination of online classes. They're doing one of those semesters in practice that I told you about in wherever they want to be. Or doing an independent research project. So they achieve the rest of their credits in those 3 semesters by one combination. We have it, and we also have a robust student advising system. So our reduced residency students are assigned to me as their advisor, and I work with them to make sure that they get all of their requirements done ahead of time, so that they have maximum flexibility to take externships and online classes in their subsequent 3 semesters.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Another question regarding that first year experience.
Mm-hmm.
How is our first year experience different than other law schools? How are our students? And can you kind of elaborate on what they're going through?
Sure. I would highlight 2 things that make us, I think, unique in the first year experience. As you probably have heard, prospective students, the first year of law school can be stressful. There's this Socratic learning environment that everyone's sort of afraid of, and it can be a stressful time. I think 2 features of Vermont Law School make us unique in that way. The first is we have a really robust academic success program. So our academic success program is run by the director, Joe Brennan, and he and his team really works with students from orientation right until they take the bar exam to help them with their study skills. You could think of them as academic coaches. They run a series of programs, especially in the beginning of the semester, weekly programs on like how to outline, how to prepare for class, how to write essay exams, how to attack multiple choice questions, how to work in a study group. So things like that. But students can also meet one-on-one with Professor Brennan or a member of his team to work on their individual study plans. Before I became the Vice Dean for Students, I was the Assistant Director of Academic Success. And I can tell you that a typical meeting schedule I would have is I would have a weekly meeting with students where we would go through and plan their calendar. And I was somewhat of an accountability partner for them. So when they came to meet me the next week, we would go through where they had strayed from their calendar or their study plan, where they had been successful, figure out how to make it more efficient the next week. I would work with them on practice essays. I would help them plan for their legal writing assignments. And so it's really an individualized academic coach model that we offer to all students as part of our academic success program. In addition to helping students in the first year, the academic success program really helps students all the way through the bar exam, helps them prepare for and plan where they're going to take the bar and how they're going to prepare for the bar. The academic success program also employs academic mentors. So these are second and third year students and students that have been master's students who have good study skills and have really used the services of academic success in their first year to their benefit. And those students are also available to meet one-on-one with current students to help them really prepare for a class. So sometimes even as first year students will meet with either our academic success professors, or the mentors to say, I want to go to Professor Firestone's office hours and ask him a question, but I'm nervous. I'm nervous that my question's stupid. I'm nervous that he's not going to want to hear my question, or he's going to ask me a question and I don't know. And we sort of help the students prepare for that meeting because it can be stressful when you first get here interacting with faculty members. But I think once you get here, you'll quickly learn how approachable and friendly our faculty is. And that was really the second thing I wanted to talk about what makes our first year different is our community. I think it's part because we're in a small town. It's part because we're Vermont. It's part because we have a lot of professors that were practitioners before they became professors, but we are a close-knit community. We help each other out. We support each other. Winters can be tough here. I'm in charge of weather delays and weather cancellations. And so students are always looking for an email from me in the morning, letting them know if school is on or not. But we're a community that's close-knit and we help each other out. And it's not a competitive environment that you may see at other law schools. And I can tell you personally that the atmosphere here is different than the atmosphere that I saw in my own first year of law school. I did not go to law school here. And it's just a supportive environment, and it's almost too supportive at times because everyone does look out for each other and care about each other so much. I mean, I've even heard from, we have a sandwich shop in town, and occasionally the woman that works at the sandwich shop has called me to say, this student usually comes in every Friday for a roast beef sandwich, and he didn't come in the last 2 Fridays, and I'm worried that he's sick or something is wrong with him, and can you just check and make sure he's okay? So it is a small town, and we look out for one another. We care about one another. We support each other from the time that you get here till the time that you graduate.
Thank you. One thing, I have another question, Beth, and in our chat session, I want to know where everybody's from. Big thing about Vermont law is we're a national law school. So 95% of our students come from out of state, and then they come here and they do all their internships, externships, kind of anywhere they want to in the country, and they can work anywhere in the country. So my question was, are we completely responsible for finding our own positions in our own home state for externships and networking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is absolutely not. So we have an externship. We have 3 faculty members in our externship program, and they work to help you find a position there. So it's a situation where you meet with them, you tell them where you want to be geographically, you tell them what you're interested in, and then they work to find you a placement. You still have to apply for the placement through the externship office, but they're the ones that find the listings and the placements for you. I mean, there might be times where you're interested in something very specific, and you might have your own ideas about where you want the placement to be. And in that scenario, the externship faculty members will work with you to set that up to make sure it's a program that meets both our requirements and the American Bar Association's requirements for experiential learning.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Beth. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is the number of co-curricular activities, symposiums. What do you think makes a 1L, 2L student balance out their academic career?
Yeah, so in terms of our co-curricular, we have a robust MOOC court program, which I'm very involved in. And then we also have our Law Review and Vermont Journal of Environmental Law, which are student-run journals that students, after their first year, can apply to be members of. You also earn credit for all of those activities, so they're co-curricular. But then we have a ton of extracurricular activities as well. We have a student group. We have every student group you can imagine on campus, from the Animal Law Society to the Environmental Law Society to many of our affinity groups, our Black Law Students Association, the Asian Law Students Association, and so on and so forth. So we have pretty much every student group that you can imagine. If you get here and you decide that there is a student group you're interested in that we don't have, I would be surprised, but you can start it. So every year, or we occasionally have new student groups. Just, I think last year, or maybe it was this year, a student newspaper that had been dormant for a few years. A student came here and said, I want to be a part of the student newspaper. I want to get that going again. And now we have a student newspaper again this year. So we definitely have a lot of opportunities for students to work outside of the classroom. And these can be good social experiences for students as well. Another good thing about Vermont is there aren't a ton of distractions here. So student groups and co-curricular and extracurricular activities really do form the fabric of social life here at Vermont Law School as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Beth. So with that, I know we talked about our JD program. Sorry, I'm moving through the slides. One thing, Vermont Law, we are really built on advocacy. So our students come to Vermont Law with a mission, and our code that we go by is law for the community and the world. And so we have several public interest programs, and one of which is our restorative justice program. So I'm going to hand it over to Professor Clark, who is our director. And on top of all her wonderful accolades, I'm going to have her talk a little bit about herself. But she is an avid skate skier. And so our winter, we're having one of those winters that we have no snow, and so, which is unusual. So she was a little disappointed because the snow was gone early. But so Professor Clark, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah, and I will say, while the snow ended sort of early for me, I'm an adult learner skate skier, but my daughter decided this year to race for the first time, and she actually managed to finish her season. So I think that's what really matters. As Katie said, I'm the director of the Center for Justice Reform, and I also teach in our program. And so I teach ethics and restorative justice, and right now I'm teaching clemency, pardon, and expungement. And those classes are both online and residential. So, we're sort of facile in both platforms, which is really nice. In terms of my history, I've done some general civil litigation work, sort of traditional lawyering, but really my history is primarily within the courts. I was a magistrate in Ohio, so if you want to think of a background in a traditional court setting, I have that. And then along my path, I've always had an interest in and been trained and done a lot of mediation and very interested in alternative dispute resolution and those kinds of things. Fast forward to Vermont, I was able to work in the treatment courts in Vermont. And so I helped launch the first DUI treatment court in the state. And then I also got to work with the drug treatment courts and the mental health treatment courts in a number of different counties. And then after that, I was very fortunate to be able to be a lead organizer for the International Restorative Justice Conference that was hosted by VLS in 2018, which was a tremendous opportunity. Right now, I guess in terms of extracurricular activities, one of the things I am is the advisor of the Outdoor Club. And so that it's fun to get our students out to skate ski for the first time too. I am excited today to talk to you a little bit about the Center for Justice Reform and about restorative justice itself, and also a little bit about our programs. I do want to start though with the outdoors, because I did get out first thing this morning, and even though the snow is gone, and it's still kind of crisp and cool, there is some fabulous sunshine out there. And at the very edges of my yard, I found the little shoots are starting to come up. So the little tulips and daffodils, which is exciting. And so my daughter and I last fall, we planted a bunch of bulbs, and we didn't mark where any of them are. So we have this fabulous surprise that's about to happen when everything sort of comes up and we don't know where it's going to be or what it's going to be. But at least it's starting to show. The thing that I really thought about though when I saw that was the resiliency of nature. And I wanted to say that specifically because, everything that's going on, I can't be a restorative practitioner without at least talking about it somewhat. And if you think about the resiliency of nature and how it's always pushing forward and pushing ahead, I think that speaks to how all of you are here today. And it shows the resiliency of you coming to share this time with us, thinking about your future and planning ahead. And so I'm excited to have you here to talk a little bit about restorative justice as well, because in this time also, I was thinking about how we're striving to stay connected. And that's something that's a real core principle of restorative justice. So let me talk a little bit about it. We're all related, we're all connected, and restorative justice really places at the core human relationships and human connections. And we can build shared values, and we can work together to transcend all kinds of different forms of conflict. When I describe restorative justice, it really is kind of this big umbrella, and I'm going to give you just a little tiny bit of information about it. But usually I describe it as sort of two sides. One is the side that I sort of just touched upon, which is a response to harm and conflict and transcending any conflict situations. If you think of our criminal justice system, that is the place where most people think about restorative justice and are most familiar with it. I can give a few examples. If you think of the criminal justice continuum, there's lots of different places along that continuum where there are different restorative approaches or responses that get applied. So one example is pretrial diversion. So you may have a prosecutor who decides that for whatever reason, they don't want to charge somebody or they don't want to pursue a conviction in a particular case. So it could be pre-charge or pretrial, but it's at the very beginning of that continuum. And so often those are low-level offenses and they'll get diverted. And in Vermont, we have these community justice centers, and there are reparative panels with trained restorative practitioners, but they come from the communities all throughout the state. So they will meet with someone who's been referred to a diversion program right in their community. And those community members will come together with whoever the person is that's caused the harm. And they will meet with them and go through this process that, one, the person who's caused the harm has to be accountable for what they've done. And they have to be able to hear and understand the impact that it's created within their community. And that's part of what the community members bring to that conversation, is to share what's happened to them because of that behavior. But they also bring this support, right? And together, the person who's caused the harm is being accountable, but isn't being shamed, isn't being punished, is actually being part of the solution. How can we repair? How can we make amends? And how can we move forward? How can we continue to move forward together in the community? What happens is, as long as the person complies with whatever that agreement is that they've come up together with, then they will move forward in their community and they'll be accepted back in a really supportive way at the same time. So that's sort of one example at one end of the continuum. If you go to the farthest end, I'll give one more example of another restorative thing that happens in Vermont, and that's when somebody's coming out of prison. So if you think about a person who's actually gone through the whole system, has been convicted, has done some time in jail, and then comes out, there's a concern about how do we best support that person and integrate them back into a community and support the community in that integration as well. And so there's a process in Vermont called COSA, which is Circle of Support and Accountability. And again, there's community members that come together, and there's a facilitator for this particular process. And it's a lengthy process. It's a full year, and these people come together on a COSA. And so we meet every single week, and we do this for at least a year, often longer than a year, to help that person navigate what does reentry really look like? What are the things that they need to know? What are the dangers? What are the things that they might have to think about and change so that they can be part of the community? So that's kind of another example of a restorative approach on the far end of the spectrum. There's lots of other different examples along the continuum. So there's family group conferencing, there's even just progressive prosecution in terms of how somebody might go through the system and what might be recommended. There's victim offender dialogue. So there's lots of different opportunities for how can we respond to harm and conflict in a different way. The other side of restorative justice is the other side that I think of. It sounds lofty because it's how do we live personally and professionally in a total restorative way, just from the outset. And it sounds sort of like this lofty ideal, but in reality, it's happening all across the country in schools. So schools are taking the entire institution, and so faculty, staff, administration, and students are working together in a restorative model. So they already value the relationships that they have differently. They already communicate differently. And so when there are situations that finally arise that do have harm or conflict, they already have a different way of communicating about those things and a way of processing that information differently. So that, again, they're putting those relationships at the center. They're trying to figure out how then do we move forward. I think that application is one of the most exciting components about restorative justice. And what's really exciting is that it actually applies across so many different systems. So if you think about social work, if you think about law enforcement, governance, policy, responses to environmental harm and regulation, those are all things that can be done in a restorative way. So let me talk a little bit about then what we offer in terms of the programs, because we do have a Master of Arts in Restorative Justice. So you can have, courses across the spectrum that deal with all of those things I just mentioned. So if you're interested in things in the criminal justice context, we've got Applied Criminal Justice. We've got the Advanced Criminal Law Seminar, which right now is Police Use of Force. We also have classes that specialize in victim rights. So adversity, trauma, and victimization, advanced victim rights, We also have classes on the education side. So we've got restorative justice in educational institutions, and then there's all sorts of things in between, including a global restorative justice class that looks outside of the United States, because there are other countries that are really ahead of us in terms of working and living restoratively. There are some places that have full restorative cities. So there's great opportunities, and there's an opportunity to learn about all of those different facets in the Master of Arts in Restorative Justice. We also have some people that come to us that are already working in a professional field and they just want to augment it. So for that, we have our professional certificate. It's 9 credits, so it's 3 classes. So again, you take a foundational course and you get sort of the indigenous roots, because this is something that is as old as humanity. And so you learn those things, but then you can specialize. So if you're in law enforcement and there's a specific area that you want to look at, you can pick those other 2 classes to really fit that need, so you can take it back into the place that you're working. The other thing that we've discovered is many of the students that come into what we call the MARJ, which is the Master of Arts of Restorative Justice, decide they actually do want to pursue their JD. So we do have a joint degree program, and many of the students have gone from the MARJ into the JD program. So they apply and then get accepted into that program. A number of students that have gone out are doing different things. So we have experiential opportunities. You heard Dean McCormick talk about the externship programs. So we do offer externships as well. And we've had students that have done work with the Attorney General's office. We've also had students that have worked right in community justice centers and doing the reparative panel work, or working with the practitioners throughout the state. So there's lots of different opportunities. When people are done, we've got some people that are working in law enforcement areas like probation and parole. We also have another student who just was accepted to work with youth that are on probation I believe it's in Pennsylvania. We've got one student who's very interested in being a mitigation specialist. And then again, a number of them that go on to be attorneys and want to see how they can make a difference going forward. I do have sort of a visualization exercise that I'd like to do.
Yes, Stephanie, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I have a student who's very interested in restorative justice, and she wanted to know about clinics and externships that are restorative justice based. I know Rico's been doing some fine work.
Yes. So again, externships so actually there's a whole bunch of them that I'm in conversations with about right now. So I've got one student who's looking to be with the public defender doing restorative work up in Burlington. That's the biggest city in Vermont. I've got another student, and I will say that might be modeled off of, there's a federal model called DEVO, which is Defense Initiated Victim Outreach. And that's a way to bring a restorative process where there's been a criminal defendant for some kind of violent offense, and there's an outreach from the defense side to have a restorative process. Many people, when they think of restorative processes, think about the power of the prosecution, and that it's a much easier way to invite a restorative process. So this is a really, I think, groundbreaking opportunity to be working on the defense side with restorative justice. We also have had students that have worked again in the community justice centers. I've got one student last year who worked statewide with a number of the clients that were coming into the different community justice centers around the state. We had another student who was working through the Attorney General's office, particularly in their pretrial diversion, because you heard me talk about diversion at the beginning, and that's another place where restorative panels get implemented. And so we had a student who did that, and then also created a legislative fact sheet on what was happening. So then got to sit in on some of the policy meetings with the attorneys in the AG's office, who were then presenting to the legislature. So there was a direct opportunity to also be involved in terms of the governance that's happening in our state.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you. So right now I have the slide up that has some of our course offerings. So you all can see it's pretty, for a brand new program, it's we're in our second year, so it's pretty expansive. And I am going to move on to your visualization. So Simon's going to be chatting, you guys. So we want to hear, once Professor Clark gives us what she wants, I want to kind of hear from you a few things words that pop up. All right.
So this is something I really like to do when I'm introducing people to restorative justice, and to just sort of think about some different concepts. And so you see the words, it says, criminal justice system, and it's just to visualize. And what I ask you to do is think of words or images that just come into your mind when you think about our criminal justice system. And if you want to share them, you can type them into the chat. There's generally words that sort of come up whenever I do this exercise. And so we're going to share some of the responses with you so we can see what people are thinking about when they visualize the criminal justice system. So we can see some words, a courtroom. We can watch for others. And again, you don't have to participate if you don't want to. So if you feel comfortable and want to share your words, wonderful. If not, no worries.
Fairness, mass incarceration, corrupt, reform. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Hello, Becky. Violence.
Conflict, police.
Classist. Phoebe, thank you. Classist. Child protective services. Bureaucratic. Gina, thank you for that. Divided. Scales of justice. Oh, Kieran, thank you for this. School to prison pipeline.
Yes.
Corruption. Isolated oriented. Prison industrial complex. Thank you, Uma. Wow.
Yeah. So this is very, this is very descriptive, right? In some ways of our criminal justice system as most people see it. And so what I want you to do is now just for a second, sort of think about it, but then I want you to think about just the word justice. So I want to eliminate criminal and system, and I want you to think about justice and true justice. And I want you to think of now words and images that come to you that represent true justice. And same thing, feel free to share, don't have to.
I'm going to start. Equality, balance. Thomas, hi Thomas, indemnify. Equity, access. Fairness,
hopeful.
Connection, healing. Truth. Transformation.
That's good.
James, thank you. Forgiveness. Ideals. Intersectional equality. Equity. Resolve. Understanding.
So I hope that this difference strikes you. Whenever I do this exercise, I always have to sort of pause because I think that what we see as justice, like true justice, is exactly what we should be striving for. I don't feel that our criminal justice system should be the things that it represented in the words and the images that most people conjure up. I think true justice is something different. And I think restorative justice really offers a road to creating this kind of justice system. So I appreciate you doing this exercise with me. I always find it, there's always words that I've never thought of. There's always something new, and it's always, I think, compelling. And I will say one thing about the students that have come to me in this program. They all come with a passion, and they all come with this idea of wanting to create some kind of change and to be some kind of reform leader in whatever, profession, whether it's law or something else, and they're going forward and they're really making it happen. I hope that you are excited about the opportunities that we provide. And certainly, if you have follow-up questions, I will be here, for the rest of the webinar, and you can always reach out to me personally. I'm happy to have a phone call or an interactive exchange with you. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to mention, Courtney added rights for all parties, and Sarah, humility. I think that really means a lot as far as your career as attorneys. Rectify. Everybody's still going. This is great. Yes, thank you very much. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to shift gears. What's nice about our restorative justice program is we have some courses that also relate to environmental law. And what we'll do is we're going to switch gears to environmental law and Dean Rushlow. So thank you, Dean Rushlow, for making it today and all your attempts to get in. I appreciate it. And one thing I learned about Dean Rushlow is she loves gardening, and she also is a wonderful cook. I attempted a great recipe last night. I'm not such a wonderful cook. I don't know if this time at home is going to be my like blossoming into Chefville, but I think I'll probably do other things. But I'll let you take it away, Dean.
Okay. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be with you today, thinking about the future and what we're all going to be able to do when this crazy period of time is over. So I don't know about you, but that feels really nice to me today. It's great to welcome you and tell you more about our program at Vermont Law School. So I am, as Katie said, I'm the Associate Dean for Environmental Programs and the Director of our Environmental Law Center, which is the umbrella for all things environmental at the law school. And like Dean McCormick, I'm also a professor of law. I teach evidence this spring, and in the fall, I'll be teaching air pollution. So those are the courses that I'm teaching right now. I also, like Dean McCormick, came to Vermont Law School after about 10 years of practice in Boston. I worked at a firm, a law firm in Boston that focuses on environmental, land use, and municipal law. And then I went to work at Conservation Law Foundation in Boston, where I litigated climate issues. I developed a program on food and agriculture to provide free legal services to farmers and food businesses below a certain income, and really loved that and consider myself an advocate at heart. But I came to VLS about a year and a half ago because I find it really satisfying and inspiring to help other people become the advocates that they want to be, and feel like the impact I can have, which is always really important to me, is just exponentially increased by working with our students, who then go off to do incredible things. And that's really, I think, the crowning achievement of our environmental law program is our alumni, which demonstrate just in themselves everything that VLS has to offer, because the number of alumni that have incredible environmental law jobs all over the world is truly staggering. The first time I went down to DC in my VLS capacity, I was just blown away by the number of alums we have there and the really high-level environmental jobs that they have. So I should also mention that I have a master's degree, so I know what it's like to do the joint JD master's degree, and I can speak to the benefits that having that joint degree has had for me. And I can get into that a little bit more. Coming into my time at VLS, I think every environmental law center director, I'm the current person to occupy this position, but there's been a long list of very accomplished environmental lawyers that I'm privileged to follow in their footsteps. The footprint that I really want to make on our environmental law program, and I think that distinguishes our program from other schools, is that our program is modern and innovative. We have the benefit of having been one of the first schools to really develop a mission and focus on environmental law. Not many schools can say that still, but certainly we were one of the first. We've been around as long as environmental law as a field has been around. And because of that deep background, we've been able to track how environmentalism and environmental law has changed since it really started in the 60s and 70s. And so our program, we really are making an effort to make sure our programs, our courses, everything that we offer is really up to date and preparing students to go out for the jobs that are available right now. And you can see on the slide in front of you now, we have a huge number of environmental law courses. We have the most comprehensive environmental law program in the country. We easily have more classes than any other law school in environmental law. This year, we're offering 59 unique environmental law courses. So some of those are duplicated, in different semesters so that we have more than one section, but 59 unique classes, and you can see the list here. Not only do we have the most classes, but we have the most innovative environmental curriculum. We were the school to offer this list of courses for the first time. We were the first to offer an environmental justice course, the first to offer an animal rights law course, the first to offer an environmental tax policy course, and we were the first to offer master's degrees for non-lawyers that are accredited by the American Bar Association, which I think is really significant, because if you want a master's degree in policy, in law and policy, and I know from my time practicing in Boston, there are a lot of people that get master's degrees in law and policy, but they go to schools where that content is sort of fluffy because it's not a school that really specializes in the law. If you study law and policy at BLS, you are really learning the specifics and the deep content that you need to know to study law and policy. So you're not just getting like policy light like you might get at some other schools. And I think that's something that really distinguishes our program. And I say that as someone who got a master's in public health, focused on policy at another school. And I don't think there was as much of a focus at school where I went in Boston as there should have been. We also have a really special faculty at Vermont Law School in our Environmental Law Center. They have an international reputation for their scholarship and clinical work in a variety of sectors. And our students and faculty work together. As you've heard from some of the other speakers, BLS is really a unique place in that people really care about each other. And that's not just that the students care about each other, but the faculty and students have really close relationships. And the faculty will do everything they can to help you get a job, to help you develop expertise in a field that you really want to drill into deeply. And our alumni can certainly speak to that approach and the experiential approach that many of our faculty use had a huge impact on their career. I mentioned just now experiential education, which is another aspect of environmental law that's really important to me and to our program. You can see here on the slide the clinics and institutes that we have. We have a whole bunch of clinics and institutes. I think we have more environmental clinics than any other school. I'm quite sure that we do. One of our newest clinics is our Environmental Justice Clinic, which I'm really proud of, which focuses on representing communities and partnering with communities on environmental issues that affect them disproportionately, either on the basis of race or socioeconomic status. And you can see the photograph in the top left of these four is our Environmental Justice Clinic, the first semester that it was offered. We're very proud of that. And we also have a new partnership with the Environmental Advocacy Clinic. So we've had an environmental clinic for a long time, but this year we really upped the ante by connecting that clinic through an organizational partnership with the National Wildlife Federation, which means that our clinic is counsel for that organization. When they have legal issues, they come to us. They're a national organization with the most members of any environmental organization in the country, I believe. And they're a really interesting organization because they're able to work across many demographics. They have the support not just of traditional environmentalists, but of hunters and rural communities and anglers, and something that I think BLS does a great job of taking into account is that environmentalism isn't just for hippies, it's for everybody. And we want to make sure that our students know how to represent any kind of person that cares about the environment. And so this organization was a great partnership opportunity for us.
Dean Rushlow, I have a question about how students, the US-Asia partnership and how they apply to do a fellowship or become a research assistant for the US-Asia partnership.
Sure. So that's a great question. Our US-Asia partnership, for folks that don't know, is a program that has worked particularly with China, but also is getting more into the Mekong region, Southeast Asia, working in Myanmar and some other countries, where we are. sort of like comparative law. We are sharing models of how environmental law has evolved in the US with advocates and scholars and judges in China and other countries as they develop their own suite of environmental laws, it's a much newer area in those countries. And so we're providing technical support as that's developed. We've helped create environmental law nonprofits in those countries and help to work with them to develop litigation strategies. And we also have a cohort of students in China that we're training, that we call environmental mission scholars, that we're training on environmental law so that they can then go back to their practice and be more proficient in those areas. So our students our residential students in South Royalton have the opportunity to do research with that institute. I think that's the kind of thing where once you're enrolled and you get to campus, and probably particularly after your first year, we would just connect you to that institute, and they always have a ton of research going on, and I am sure that they would be delighted to have you come work with them.
With regards to the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, what is one of the main projects that they've been working on? I know there's several, but can you
Yeah,
idea?
it's hard to choose. One thing that they've been working on is they've created a lease builder tool. And so just to back up from that a little bit, and this is something that I worked on in practice as well, farmers are very reluctant to seek out legal assistance for a few reasons. One, it's expensive, but also there's some cultural barriers to wanting to seek out help. A lot of people become farmers because they want to do their own thing, and they don't want to be bothered. They're unlikely to want to resolve conflicts by, using the law. And so one thing that the Center for Ag and Food Systems is trying to do is to try and address that barrier with different solutions. And so one thing they've developed is a lease builder tool. As one of the biggest legal issues that farmers face is with the transfer of property, either taking ownership of property or getting a lease in many cases because it's too expensive for most farmers to afford land to buy, particularly in New England. And so what a farmer can do is just plug in their information for this, either the landowner or the person who'll be leasing, and this toolkit will spit out a draft lease, which they could then take to a lawyer. And, at that point, they'd only need to be paying for a very small amount of the lawyer's time to just review that. And so cutting down on legal costs and just trying to encourage farmers to feel more ownership around those land transition issues and the legal issues that come with it. So that's one example. There's many. There's also a new project starting around fraud in the seafood industry. I'm not sure if you know this, but there is a lot of seafood that is passed off as a different kind of fish. It'll actually be a cheap overfished species, and they'll pass it off as something that they can get a higher price point for, or that's more attractive to buyers. This is rampant. I think the New York Times had an article about it, and we're actually working with the UN, the United Nations, on a developing project to address seafood fraud.
Wow. So I have another question, and we're jumping back to the US Asia program. And this is James Bryan. Dean Rushlow, have you seen any pushback in the past few years as the US-China relationship becomes less stable and the judicial system in China becomes a little more, as he says, unbalanced?
We have definitely seen changes. I mean, to be honest, this program has been around for 10 years, and the people who work in this program their background is Chinese. And they're very savvy at navigating these relationships. And I've learned so much from working with them on that. I think that they would say that things are particularly challenging right now. And in some ways, they're having to be very savvy and careful about how they're structuring their work relationships because of the US-China tensions. But we're still doing work there We are expanding our work into Myanmar and Cambodia, partially because of the tensions in China. But you mentioned the court system. One thing that's really neat that that program does is we do quite a bit of judicial training. And we've had cohorts of judges from China come to South Royalton and meet with us. I've had the pleasure of, I had 3 judges in my office last fall who were, one of them was part of the Supreme Court in the country. Another was a judge in a court that had, it was the region that had the highest agriculture sector. And we had a really interesting conversation about how in China they're navigating the tension between the environment and agriculture, which is something we see here, of course, and have a lot of developing law. So that is one way that we're sort of making an impact in our own way on the judicial system in China.
Oh, wonderful. I want to touch a little bit on the Institute for Energy and the Environment and their groundbreaking work.
Sure. So we're very proud of our Institute for Energy and the Environment. I will say, there's other schools where if you really want to focus on oil and gas and have great programs, if you want to work on clean energy, we are the only school that really offers a comprehensive program in clean energy. And that program is incredibly skilled at working with the students that want to do that work individually. And those students have an incredible job placement rate. They really are able to come to VLS, fully immerse themselves in energy in the deepest levels, and leave and get great jobs. Like, for instance, we have a number of alums, quite a few, at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in DC. We had a recent graduate just a year ago who straight out of school got a job as a hearing officer at the Department of Public Utilities in Washington State, I believe. So these students are just rock stars, and that program is super effective. We have a clinic where you can learn about transactional law and basically doing deals for clean energy development, solar panels. They've done some really interesting work working with low-income communities and getting them access to solar energy to reduce their energy costs and their carbon footprint. We're doing similar work like that with communities on electric vehicle deployment. We have a new course that we're offering this summer specifically on clean transportation and the law. So it's a truly excellent program, and I can say that the students that go through that program just absolutely love it.
Perfect. Now, and Kieran, thank you. I have another question. Then he asked it from the get-go. So Kieran, this is for you. He says, hello, Dean Rushlow. You mentioned earlier that you have students currently participating in externships at variety of governmental agencies around the U.S. Could you elaborate on these organizations and agencies, specifically those focused in environmental law? Also, where do a majority of environmental law students end up seeking employment?
Absolutely. So I'll give some examples of where students are doing or have done externships. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Justice, Environmental Enforcement Unit, departments of environmental protection in states all over the country. I mentioned EPA. Some of those are at headquarters in Washington, D.C. Others will go to different regional offices for EPA. So for instance, if you know you want to be in Boston or in New England, then you might benefit from doing an externship with EPA Region 1, which is based in Boston, and you would get to know, both your colleagues in that area. That might be helpful for employability in that area later, either at EPA or somewhere else, as well as the issues that really affect that region. So on the government side, it's really quite broad. Certainly lots of judicial externships as well. On the NGO side, also very broad. I mentioned I worked at Conservation Law Foundation in Boston. CLF always has externs from VLS. While I was there working, there were many. I've been able to help get more there since I've been at VLS. We have people doing externships at NRDC, the Natural Resource Defense Council, at Sierra Club, at the Nature Conservancy. I mean, really any environmental NGO you can think of. And in firms as well. We have students that are at firms that focus on environmental law, that are at lobbying firms that focus on environmental policy. Any field you could think of within environmental law, there's an externship opportunity for you, and probably a pathway leading there that other students have had. So it's a huge program, very robust. In terms of employment, let's see, I think I have a couple notes on some of the jobs that some of our alums have, so I'll just read a few of those. Vice President for Wildlife Protection at the Humane Society of the United States, Director of Government Relations at the Nature Conservancy, Chief of Staff at Sierra Club, Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water at US EPA, Chief Counsel of the California Water Resources Control Board, Managing Director for Business Development at Duke Energy, Associate General Counsel for Walmart. And I mean, the list is huge. I mentioned the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That's a big one in DC. I thought I knew VLS before coming into this job. I had taught in the summer session. That's actually how I developed my connection with the school. But I will say I was genuinely blown away, genuinely, to see the alums that we have and the really incredible jobs that they have. So I truly believe that the employability of our students in environmental law is unmatched.
Yeah. And that brings me to Gina. She asked, one thing that's really important to know is we are a national school, so everybody comes from across the country, and she wanted to say, can you speak to any challenges or opportunities for students that study at Vermont but practice on the West Coast, particularly for food and agriculture law? She wanted to know about the networking aspect.
Yeah, I think that is really, I think that the school can prepare you to work in any area of the country that you want. And I say that in a few different ways. Our courses are not focused on Vermont. That's the truth. I mean, most courses in law school, wherever you go, are going to be very focused on federal law rather than state law. And so that's transferable anywhere you'd want to go. If you want to develop relationships in a particular geographic area, the way you do that is by doing an externship in that area, maybe doing a judicial clerkship in that area as a summer job or post-graduation. And you develop relationships in the place that you want to go. And we prepare you with the skill set to blow them out of the water in California or wherever it is you want to go. And I know that we have relationships. I mean, I can think of several. We work with Public Justice, which I know does a lot of work in California on food and ag. So our relationships are national and international. They're really not just regional.
And that goes back to the flexibility that Dean McCormick was speaking of. So we gear your experience, we gear your law experience to what your outcome is. And in our career services seminar, webinar next week, we can talk a little more about that. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about, Joan Pinto has some questions about the MURL externships, and are they different for online students?
I don't believe so. I mean, and I can say for the online program, our director, our energy director, is very committed to the online program, and he has a lot of anecdotal evidence that the students in that program are really succeeding in getting jobs and, having the benefit of the program in the same way or similar way as if they were on campus. So he might be able to provide some more details on some of the recent externships people have done, but I will just say I talked to him about this a lot, and he is so positive about the opportunities that the online MURLs are having in terms of employment.
Yeah. Also, they were looking at externships and relationships in Canada, which one of our professors who teaches online is from Canada. So we do have some connections there. I don't know, Jenny, if you have any.
Well, I do know that one of our environmental students did our exchange program with McGill this year. We have an ongoing relationship with McGill where you can spend, I think it's a semester in Montreal. And so if you're really committed to wanting to work in Canada, I think that might be something to consider. Um, and I can't specifically think of externships that we've done there. I mean, I have some familiarity with some NGOs in Canada, so that might be something to explore, but it might be a good question for our externship director. We can follow up if you're interested.
Yes, and she will be on next week too. So
Wonderful.
please, yeah, as I'm doing my shameless plugs for our next webinar. Okay, so field study classes. I don't know if you want to touch briefly on this.
Sure, yeah. So, and this gets to the question a little bit about, are we successful in being able to get people jobs outside of the area? We know that Vermont, is a small community, and that's not where a lot of our alums are going to end up, nor are we encouraging or pushing for that. And so part of offering a strong environmental program, particularly given the nature of the work, is getting out to the places where conservation is happening, where environmental injustice is happening. And so some of the opportunities that we have a couple different classes focused on public lands and tribal rights out west. One based in Utah during the year, another based in Montana that's a backpacking kind of deep wilderness oriented in the summer. And those include hikes and visits to national monuments. We offer a week-long course in Cuba in the fall that's focused on sustainable energy and agriculture, where students get to visit sustainable farms and meet Cuban NGOs and government representatives. And those are just a few examples. I'm quite sure we have more field courses in environmental law than any other law school. Something we really pride ourselves on is that experiential type of learning in the landscape that you're working to protect.
All right. Oh, and our summer session.
Yes. So one of the gems of our environmental program is our summer session. We offer, so our summer session is on the environmental side, something that we've had for many years. It's a really dedicated 8 weeks dedicated to environmental law and policy. If you get a master's at VLS or you do a joint degree with the JD and the master's, then you will very likely be spending the summer at VLS. And I went to school in Boston for law school, but I actually came up and did the summer session at VLS just as a visiting student because I wanted to have that time to just take environmental law courses. My school had like one environmental law class, and I really wanted to dig in. So, I was drawn up from Boston to do that, and I can really say it's an incredible program. It's 24 environmental law classes. That will be the case this summer with 33 faculty members, many of which are practitioners in their fields. And so this is also a nice benefit to learn from people that are actually doing this work in their day-to-day. They have great relationships and contacts. This is a networking opportunity for our students. We bring in distinguished scholars, like we had Richard Lazarus at Harvard, who's probably the most preeminent environmental law professor in the country or world, as he visited last summer. We have media fellows. We had David Abel, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the Boston Globe last summer, and he'll be teaching a class this coming summer on writing environmental advocacy. So really an excellent program. A few new courses that I'm really excited about this summer are, for the first time, we're offering a class on environmental crimes. It's going to be taught by the chief of the environmental crimes unit at the Department of Justice. So I am so excited about that class. I might actually have to sit in on it myself. We also have a new class on clean transportation law and the journalism and advocacy class that I mentioned. So we also have classes on environmental enforcement, environmental justice, animal rights, you name it. I mean, it's such a great program in the summer.
And online, we have environmental classes as well.
We do. So we actually have environmental classes year round online. And so those are available in the summer. And actually this summer we may be online with our full summer session because of everything that's going on right now, which will be an interesting opportunity. But we have environmental courses online at all times.
We talked a little bit about our environmental programs. I switched to the next slide, Dean Rushlow, and our Master's Environmental Law and Policy, which we like to call MEL. We love acronyms at Vermont Law. The Masters of Energy Regulation and Law, our MERL. Masters of Food and Agriculture Law and Policy, our MFALP. Our LLM offerings. A lot of our students will do a joint JD and a master's program, and it takes 3 years, and that's where you stay in the summer. And we work with you on, is this the right program? As far as, like, for example, I know the EPA loves when you go really deep into environmental law, so they'd like to see that joint JD master's degree. And then we have dual degrees with, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about these, Jenny. The JD and the Yale School of Forestry, and the JD with the MPhils from Cambridge.
Sure, yep. So we have most of our students that want to do joint degrees are doing them at VLS, and then we have a handful each year that do these dual degrees, which is where you get a JD at VLS and then a master's from a different school. There's the master's at the Yale School of Forestry and at Cambridge in the UK. The one at Cambridge, I think, offers a little bit more of a more general opportunity, but if you're really interested in international law, that could be a great fit. And then the Yale School of Forestry is great if you really want to dig into environmental science or a specific aspect of natural resources. They obviously have a great program, and we have several students every year that do that program and have had great opportunities.
Yeah, we have we have a student right now who's in Cambridge, Maeve. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. Yep. And when you come to law school, you don't necessarily know the path you're going to take. And so she was not planning on going to Cambridge, and she's in Cambridge, but she's doing well. She's hunkered down. And we have a number of students that do the Yale School of Forestry. And that's a great program. And it adds a little time to your JD experience, but it's well worth it if you want to go really deep into that science aspect. And the Masters of Natural Resources at UVM, a number of my master students do that program. Jenny, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so sort of similar to the forestry program, if you want to dive deeper in natural resources, we have a relationship with the Rubenstein School at the University of Vermont. And again, that provides that opportunity to, in addition to the environmental law and policy experience that you get with our degree, to go deeper on the natural resources side, more on the science side, ecology, systems thinking. That's something that the Rubenstein School can offer, and that's a nice opportunity to pair those two things, and we have such a great relationship with their school.
And I have a question about the process of applying for these dual degrees. So you apply separately. So for example, with Yale, typically students will apply their December of their first year or second year. I have a current admitted student who applied to both at the same time, and she'll come to VLS first. And then after her second year, she'll head off to Yale. So you apply to them separately. And that's really important to look at the requirements. And I can also send you, or I'll have Simon send you Anne Linehan, who really works with these programs and can get into the nitty gritty of how you apply. All right, let's see. All right, it's hard on these. I'm sorry for that slide. I came to the realization that the bars are hard to read, so I apologize about that. This is my favorite slide, Jenny. I feel,
yes.
This is
one of our innovations in the last year is our Hothouse Earth podcast. And so these are our hosts. You can see here, that's Jeannie Oliver, who's a professor in our Institute for Energy and the Environment, and Mason Overstreet, who's an attorney in our Environmental Advocacy Clinic. They're our hosts of the podcast. So you can find this podcast anywhere that podcasts are available. It's been up for a little less than a year. We're actually having our year anniversary soon. And we have about 2,000 downloads of our podcast. So it's getting a lot of hits. And it's designed to be accessible coverage of timely environmental law and policy issues. So you can see a few examples of the topics we've covered. Our episode on the youth climate movement was really fantastic. We had a really cool one on climate migration and kind of the joint impacts of climate and immigration issues. The border wall episode I thought was really interesting about some of the environmental impacts that are associated with the proposed border wall between US and Mexico. So I just love this podcast so much. It's a way that we're making sure to stay connected with the outside world. Not only do we interview our own professors on this podcast, but we talk to people all over the country, professors at other schools, practitioners. Sometimes we feature alums that are doing exciting work. But it's a great way, particularly if you're trying to feel out whether this field is right for you. Check out this podcast. It might be a good way for you to get a sense of what this work really is, and it's accessible. It's not like opening a case book and diving into a Supreme Court case. So check it out and share it with your friends.
Yes, I now know more about the Farm Bill. It was very informative, and I can feel it. I actually can feel like I can have some good conversations based on what I learned from the podcast. Jenny, I have one last question. Has anyone done the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic over a summer?
That's a great question. So I actually know that clinic really well. The director of that clinic is a close friend of mine, and when I was at Conservation Law Foundation, I worked with them all the time on cases. I'm trying to think of who some of their fellows have been. I think we have had a student do some of their summer fellowships, but I can't say for sure. Professor Beiranovan, who directs our Center for Ag and Food Systems, might be able to answer that. But we actually have had clinic projects between our clinic and that clinic, and there's a ongoing relationship between those two clinics. We work together pretty closely. Professor Beiranovan works with Professor Broadleaf at Harvard all the time. So lots of integration there.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I want to thank everybody, and I want to touch on something that I did not have planned, but someone brought it up earlier. And this is a little bit about the COVID situation and how we're handling it as a school here at Vermont Law, and what our hopes are for our entering JD classes. I'm going to turn it over to Dean McCormick.
Hi, everyone. In addition to my job teaching here, I'm also a member of the task force team that's been responding to the COVID-19 crisis over the last couple of weeks. And I wanted to update you on where we are with that and what our plans are. So our students were on spring break last week. So while the students were on spring break, the school did make a decision to extend spring break or not to have residential classes begin for 2 weeks while we sort of assessed what the situation was. Quickly into that break, we determined, like every other American Bar Association accredited law school, that we would complete our semester online, which we began on Wednesday. So we have had 3 official days of having the rest of our JD and master's semesters online. The good news about this transition was that Vermont Law School has been teaching online classes since 2011. We've really been a leader in putting classes on into the online space. And so I won't say the transition was easy, but the transition was manageable, and it's so far been successful. The feedback I've gotten from students, faculty, and staff is that this transition to virtual VLS has been successful in the last week. And as I said, we will finish out the spring semester in a virtual world. We are trying to figure out what we're going to do for the summer and fall. I remain personally very hopeful that our global healthcare leaders will help us return to normalcy before the summer. I'm also encouraged by some of the recent studies that I've read that suggest that increased temperatures and higher humidity levels will have a positive effect on eradicating this virus. But we are preparing for the eventuality or the possibility that it will not. Currently, the American Bar Association lets JD students take 29 of their 87 credits online. And right now, we offer enough classes to fulfill those 29 credits and more online already. The American Bar Association does limit the number of credits that JD students can take online in their first year to 10. So of the 32 credits that a student typically takes in their first year, the American Bar Association, as of right now, only allows you to take 10. We are prepared to bring 10 credits online to you if we need to do that. And I suspect that if this crisis continues, the American Bar Association may relax some of those restrictions, although that's something that we'll just have to see what happens in the coming days and weeks. So this is something we're thinking about. This is something we're ready to do. And I expect a final decision will be made in the coming days as the situation becomes more clear about how long we're going to be need to keep students off the physical campus. I can answer any questions if you have them.
Yeah, I mean, does anybody have any more questions? I have to say, as a community member of VLS, it's been so supportive as a staff person. Everyone was set up remotely, and all of us gathered as a community to make sure our students, when they got back from spring break, we mailed, if anyone wasn't coming back, we mailed all their materials. We have this, yesterday we had a community call with everyone. So I feel really still connected. And it's nice to see, John Miller and Dean Rushlow and all my colleagues on this. So, yeah, I feel like we're at the real open house. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody. I have someone that says, how can we, I think you might already go to law school at Vermont Law. So how can we petition the ABA to relax their stringent regulations about online classes?
Oh, well, they have issued some emergency guidance where they are relaxing things, but I suspect they'll come out with a more formal answer on the online credits if the situation continues. But not to worry, it is something that every ABA accredited law school is talking about and working with each other on. I'm not able to offer you certainty right now, but it is something that is deeply a subject of every law school's conversation with the ABA at this moment. I think I said it earlier, every single ABA accredited law school is now online, so or is now moved to a virtual space for the remaining spring semester. So it is something that is a daily topic of conversation with us and the ABA and other law schools.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I want to thank everybody, and thank you for Melody and Simon for running the back end, and thank you Dean Rushlow, Professor Clark, Dean McCormick, John Miller. I feel very supportive. Thank you, Nellie, for that word today. This was my first webcast, so I am very thrilled. And I want to invite you. We'll have more information. I'll email you. I'm going to email a survey out, so let me know your thoughts. And I hope that you visit us webpage, look at videos. I personally have one where I walk around town so you can see our grocery store, and just keep in touch and let us know if you need anything. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us.